Hello, and welcome to this lesson about whole steps and half steps at the piano. So in this short lesson, we're going to learn about what whole steps and half steps are at the piano, how to recognize them with your eyes and with your ears, and also how to find the patterns that make up certain scales at the piano. So as you watch this video, I encourage you to take out a sheet of paper so you can take notes. Also, you can print out the paper piano and have that with you to follow along, or sit at your piano keyboard to also follow along so that you understand the concepts and can play along and grasp them with your hands and with your ears as we do this. So let's get started. So what will we learn today? We will define what half steps and whole steps are at the keyboard. We're going to use the piano key names to show what half steps and whole steps are. So meaning each key on the piano has a letter name, which refers to a note. We're going to use that to talk about whole steps and half steps. We're going to use accidentals, which are basically sharps and flats, to name the keys and define whole steps and half steps. And finally, we will show what the whole step and half step patterns are that make up a five-finger pattern, a major five-finger pattern, as well as what is the whole step and half step pattern that makes up a major scale. So, what is a half step? A half step is basically the distance between two adjacent keys, meaning that the keys are right next to each other. So they can either be white or black keys that you're heading to, the keys are next to each other, or they can be sharp notes, meaning you move to the right, or flat notes if you move to the left, either white or black. Or they can just be to the very next white key. So in this example, if I play it for you, I'm going to be using the keyboard for the rest of the presentation so that you can hear and see the half steps and whole steps in action. Okay, so I've switched my camera. So to hear what a half step sounds like at the piano, we have this sound. Also this one. And this one. So notice the sound it makes, and also where my fingers are going. The keys are right next to each other, and you can go either direction, going up in this case. So we're going to a sharp key. If I were to name it, it would be C sharp. We'll get to that later in the presentation. And then these are just two white keys, so right next to each other. So notice there's no black key in the middle. And then we have black to white. And again, could be in either direction. In this case, if we went back down to make lower sounds, we would have a flat here. In this case, it would be A flat. So those are half steps. Okay, now we have whole steps. So the difference between whole steps is that we have the distance between three keys, meaning we skip a key. And if you think about half steps, two halves make a whole. So two half steps is basically a whole step, meaning we skip a key. And then in the next slide after this, we'll talk about letter names, but I'll tell you now that it can be a letter name from C to D or F to G, or it can be a key to a sharp or to a flat. So in this case, notice we have white key to white key, but look here, I have this arrow here that we're skipping the black key. So we go from this key, we're skipping this black key in the middle to get to this other note, right? So that's why I say three keys, 1, 2, 3, and then it makes this sound. We also have this, so that's considered a whole step, and also you can hear the difference as far as between that and what would a half step sound like. And finally, we have this example. And so notice here, I skipped this white key in the middle. We skip the white key to get to here, so here to black key. And just like I put in the slide, if you want to know the letter names that we'll talk about, so this is from C to D. That's considered a whole step because we're skipping the black key in the middle. F to G, that's also a whole step. skipping it in the middle, the black key in the middle. And here we have B to C sharp, and we're skipping the C in the middle, or the white key in the middle. So now we have basically piano key names. So it's written out here for you. So just to review, remember our musical alphabet only has 7 letters, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So the pattern repeats basically. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then you go back to A, and it repeats. And then you can also have what we call accidentals, also called sharps or flats. So sharps are to the right. So say I had a note F here. If I went to the key to the right, the very next key, that would give us F sharp. If I came at it at the other direction, if I had a G and went down lower sounds to the left, that would be called G flat. Right? So if we were to talk about whole steps and half steps, let's think about that for a second. Can you name the 2 whole steps that you see in this example here? So again, what is a whole step? We talked about it. It would be you're skipping a key. So I'll give you a second and write it down on your paper or figure it out at your keyboard. And again, we want to try to name what are the letter names that we're going to name. So you want to use the letter names or the musical alphabet to name what the whole steps would be. And the answer is... So if you got it, it would be F to G. Because we go F, we skip F sharp, we go to G. And then we also have E to F sharp. So E, skip F, we go to F sharp. Right? And then let's do another example. Can you name the 2 half steps that are in the example here? And again, do you remember what a half step is? I'll give you a second. So the 2 half steps, if you use the letter names to name them, they would be C to C sharp, key right next to each other, and then B to C. So white to white, they would be right next to each other here. Right, so that is using your key names, or you know the names of the keys on the piano, and you're trying to know what is a whole step and how would you describe that. And now we're going to talk about 5-finger patterns. So basically a 5-finger pattern is also called a pentascale, penta meaning 5. And we want to make a C major 5-finger pattern. And that basically is what are the first 5 notes of the C major scale. If you remember our last slide, we talked about the musical alphabet being A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and repeating. So C major has no sharps or flats, so we want to go from C all the way to C. So what are those letters? And more specifically, what are the first 5 letters? So those first 5 letters would be C, D, E, F, and G. Right? And now, let's see, can you name what is the whole step, half step pattern for the C 5-finger pentascale? So meaning, what are the steps between C and D? What kind of step between D and F? What kind of step do we have between F and E and F? And F and G? What are those steps? Whole steps, half steps? So I'll give you a second. You can pause this video. Alright, hopefully you got it. So the answer is whole, whole, half, whole. So basically when we talk about whole steps, you can mark it with W's and H's. So C to D, that's a whole step. And then D to E was a whole step. E to F was a half step. And F to G was a whole step. And I also wrote it down here. So that's basically what the last slide said. So that's a 5-finger pattern right there. Whole step, half step, whole step. Now, if you want to find a major scale, how do we find a major scale, and what would the rest of the pattern be using whole steps and half steps? Well, again, we're going from C to C on the keyboard, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You pretty much know your regular pentascale. We just went over it. Whole, whole, half, whole. That takes us up to G. So now your job is to figure out what are the steps to fill in if we went from G to A to B, and B to C. G to A, is that a whole step or half step? A to B, is that a whole step or half step? B to C, is that a whole step or half step? So take a minute and figure out what are those last 3 blanks we gotta fill in. And here's the answer. So the major scale pattern is whole, whole, half, whole, and the rest of it is whole, whole, half. And why this is important is because in piano, if you want to make a major scale and you don't know what the key is, or the names of the keys, I mean, if you know the names of the keys, then you can pretty much, if you know the whole step, half step pattern, then you can find out what the major keys are, or what the major scale pattern is. I'm sorry. So you can find any key on the piano, start from there, and if you know this pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, you're able to make a major scale. So in this case, C to C, so C to D, we're going to go, right? That's our goal. Major scale, 8 notes. So C to D, the first 5 notes of our pentascale we already know. So C to D, whole step. D to E, whole step. E to F, half step. F to G, whole step. G to A, whole step, because we're skipping this black key. A to B, skipping this black key, is a whole step. And then B to C is a half step. So again, pentascale has its own pattern. Whole, whole, half, whole. And if we have a major scale, you just extend it to whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Alright, so what have we learned today? We learned that a half step is distance between 2 adjacent keys, or basically 2 keys that are right next to each other on the piano. They can be white or black keys. So I have little examples here, right? Half steps here, half steps with these keys. Whole step is a distance between 3 keys. So we skip a key. Again, you can also think of it as basically 2 half steps. You put them together, it makes a whole step, going from one key to the next, but you're skipping a key as you're doing it. Accidentals is another word for sharps or flats, and they can be used sometimes when you're defining or finding out a whole step or half step from and to certain keys on the piano. And we found out what the whole step and half step pattern is for a major 5-finger pattern. So it's a whole, whole, half, whole. That's our pattern. If we were to describe a major 5-finger pattern. Same thing if I took another key, D major. They all have this pattern of whole, whole, half, whole. And then if we did a scale, the pattern's extended where we have whole, whole, half at the end. So major scale pattern. So in this case, I'm doing a different key, E major. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, and then half step. So that is our lesson for today, and you learned about whole steps and half steps and the patterns that go along with them.